So now going into the keynote address for today, it's really an honor for me to be able to introduce our keynote speaker, who I'll get to in just a minute. But I wanted to just open up by saying how the reason why I had actually asked Kassy to speak today is because I saw her speak at IACP, and I was truly inspired by her story of turning something terrible into something really great. I've always had a lot of respect for people that were able to do that and not turn bitterness and hate when something bad happens. But it was kind of always an abstract concept to me. I didn't experience anything like that myself until May 10th of this year, when my nephew, Anthony Stefanacci, took his life. And I literally thought of Kassy and her story turning the death of her husband into a huge movement in her state to bring people together rather than continue to divide. She talks a lot about us versus them, and it's the same concepts that we've been trying to incorporate into policing and law enforcement in this state. I'm a strong proponent that it is not us versus them, it's us with them. It's police, community members, advocates, everybody working together. So Kassy and her story have inspired me to take something terrible with the death of my nephew and make it into something good. And I hope that her story will also inspire you to leave here after the symposium and continue to do good. So with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Kassy Alia Ray.
Can y'all hear me? Good morning. Thanks for joining me bright and early. And again, kudos to the brave souls on the floor. Thank you so much for welcoming me here today. And Chuck, my heart is with you and your family. And I have the utmost confidence that your nephew is beaming down, looking at you with pride and love. I want to start this morning by first saying what an honor it is to be with you today. Thank you so much for what you do. Your bravery, your selfless sacrifice, your heart and soul for this work, it makes a difference in communities all across New York. And even in a bigger way, because of you, our world is a safer, better place. I want to pause here for a second and think about that. Why do you do what you do? Can I see a show of hands? Who got into this work for the fame and fortune? Nobody? Now, how about who got into this because you wanted to help people? Because you wanted to make a difference? I see some people didn't raise your hands. Either you're not listening or there's another reason, and I'm interested to hear what that might be. I've been really proud and thankful. One of the greatest gifts that I've had these last few years is the opportunity to meet some incredible human beings, men and women who are doing amazing things because they were called to serve others. And by and large, the top reason, if not really the reason, why people get into the public safety field is because you want to help people, right? You want to make a difference. You want to keep people safe. That resonates deeply with me because that's the same reason why my husband Greg got into this work. I met Greg after he had just come back from LA. So a little bit about Greg. He always wanted to go into service, But his family encouraged him first to pursue his degree and to explore different options. And so he got his bachelor's at the University of South Carolina with his major in media arts and minor in criminal justice because he really loved movies as well. And so when he graduated, still wanting to serve, his parents encouraged him to explore other options. And so he went out to LA, got to work on some pretty cool projects. He was a production assistant for Indiana Jones and Iron Man, and even got offered a job with Marvel. But that wasn't what his heart was calling him to do. And I met him when he came back to Columbia, South Carolina, where he was beginning to serve as a police officer in the place where he was born and raised. Greg loved being a police officer. I remember there were a few opportunities where he could have risen through the ranks, but it would have taken him off the road. And it felt like he was almost sabotaging these opportunities. And I was like, Greg, what's going on? And he was like, Kassy, I'm not done being off the road yet. That's how much he loved it. He loved being able to continue to serve his community, boots on the ground in the field. And at the time of his death, he was really excited to serve as a field training officer. You know, I think about Greg's career and what he loved, the excitement that he had at the beginning of his career. He graduated from the South Carolina Criminal Justice Academy in 2009. The spark that it was in his eyes when he would tell stories about his work, his passion for what he did. But then I also think about near the end of his career, as we got into 2014 and 2015. Now, I don't know what that time was like for you, but for me, as the wife of a police officer, it was really, really hard. You know, looking back now, we know that that was really the start of the unrest that we've seen this now 10 years, and really the beginning of our modern social justice movement in America. But at the time, it was really hard for me because I felt like everywhere I turned was a reminder of these growing tensions, this divisiveness. I saw it on the news, social media, conversations at the table with friends. And the message that I received was that I had a choice, that I could either be for police or for community. And that didn't make sense to me. Does this resonate when you all think back to that time and what it was like? I'll never forget asking Greg. It was July of 2015. It was right around the time of the Freddie Gray riots. Do you remember in Baltimore? And I was watching it intently. I have a brother-in-law who is a Baltimore County police officer, so it was especially impactful. And I was standing in our kitchen with Greg, and I asked him what he thought about the divisiveness between police and communities. And he said, Kassy, no one wants a bad cop brought to justice more than a good cop. But for every one negative story you hear in the news, there are thousands of positive stories happening every day that go untold. You know, I think about Greg, and I think about his message, and I wonder what he would say today. Tragically, Greg gave his life in the line of duty when he was shot and killed responding to a suspicious person on September 30th of 2015. In about 2 weeks, will mark 9 years since we lost Greg. And I think about his passion for the work, his resilience, the message that he shared. And in preparing for today, I imagined what I would say to him if he were sitting in this room. You know, I hope that that passion would have remained steadfast, but I could also imagine a path where that may have been really, really hard. The last 9 or 10 years in public safety field and our country in general has been really, really hard. And I think we're seeing the wear and tear of that division in so many ways, whether it be recruitment and retention and law enforcement, and so you're asked to do more and more with less and less, and also the safety and violence that's happening in our communities, compounded with a global pandemic. And so I imagined if Greg were sitting in here and wondering if he asked himself if it's all worth it. You know, it's a hard job, it's a dangerous job with a lot of trauma, and that's really, really difficult. And I am so proud and thankful of each and every one of you. And I would venture to guess that it's not the dangerous situations or the heartbreaking moments that you encounter that make you wonder if it's worth it, but it's everything else compounded on that. And so if there's one message that I hope you walk away with from here today, it's that yes, it is worth it. And not just worth it, it is critical, essential. You are the foundation for safety and peace in our communities. And the work you are doing is making a difference. And I truly hope that you also know the power of those everyday small moments. I think sometimes when we think about making a difference, we think about these grand gestures. But what I hope you walk away from here today is that it's in those power of those everyday moments that make the biggest impact. I also hope that we can stand together because I firmly believe that we can create healing across our country when we stand united with a message of hope. To share a little bit more about what I mean, I want to tell you a little bit more about my story. So this is Greg. This is my favorite part because I get to talk about him. And that's our son, Sal. I met Greg, it was in 2008. I just finished my junior year at Carolina, and I was very focused on getting into graduate school. So I have my PhD in clinical community psychology. And I was like, all right, going to grad school, no boys for me. And of course, that's when I met Greg, as many college students do, at the library. And I met him at a bar in 5 Points. So if you go to Columbia, South Carolina, you'll know our story. I started talking to him, and I was like, who is this guy? He just had this way to him, this magnetism, and it drew me in. But remember, no boys, so we left without exchanging our contact information, and then I ran into him at the grocery store the next day. We exchanged information. I had to babysit that night. I dressed real cute just in case we went on a date. It happened a few days later. But y'all, I don't know if there's such a thing as love at first sight, but if there is, that was it. I would touch Greg's hand and feel electric. Loving him made me the woman I am today and made me the woman that is able to withstand the loss of losing him. You know, Greg had many amazing qualities, but I think his kindness was his superpower. It's what made him an amazing husband, and then when we welcomed Sal on March 31st of 2015, a great dad. And from all the stories I hear, even 9 years later, it's also what made him a great police officer. But as you know, I received the news that no police family wants when on that dreadful morning of September 30th of 2015, I learned that Greg had been killed in the line of duty. I'll never forget that moment when the knock came on the door and they told me he was gone. I don't know if you all have ever had a moment like this, but it was literally as if I was out of my body, looking down, watching myself break into a million little pieces. You know, in that moment, I had lost what it felt like was everything. My best friend, the love of my life, the father of our child, my stability, my future. But amidst all the things you might expect, that grief was compounded by what I perceived as the growing divisiveness in our country. And I told you a little bit about that at the beginning of my talk, but I want to be a little bit more clear about what that felt for me, and getting back to that question of if it's all worth it. You know, even 9 years later, there is not one moment where I've ever regretted that Greg went into law enforcement. That was the person he was. Service was in his heart and soul, and I am very confident that even if Greg knew the outcome, he would have still chosen to go into policing because that's what he was called to do. And he did it not asking to be killed in the line of duty, but being willing to give his life for his neighbor, for people he didn't even know, because that's how much he cared. But what I did wonder was if other people understood that. And quite frankly, the divisiveness in our country, the hate that I was seeing, and I'm not sure this is my story and experience, I'm sure we each have our own experiences, but it made me wonder if there were even people who were celebrating that he was killed. And that really hurt. And I wanted to do something to make a difference. So what that looked like was initially starting with just trying to raise awareness of those positive stories that go untold, not taking away from the hardship, the challenges that we face, but making a space for those everyday moments that Greg talked about. And so the night after he was killed at 3 a.m., I shared a Facebook post, and I asked for two things. One, I asked that people share stories about Greg so that Sal, who turned 6 months old that day, could learn about his dad. And two, I said that Greg was a hero, and many other cops are too, and I proposed using the hashtag #HeroesInBlue as a way to raise awareness of the positive stories that so often go untold. Now, I did not have any intention of starting a movement or an organization. At the time, 28 years old, working on finishing my doctorate, doing work that I was passionate about, but I felt this calling. And so initially, under the name of Heroes in Blue, we really focused on raising awareness of the positive stories that go untold and showing appreciation to police. One of our first initiatives, I learned that December 14th, Greg and I's wedding anniversary. It's a fun fact. We had been engaged for about a year and a half, but wedding planning was like a no-go for me. I was over it. And so I found a Groupon to a bed and breakfast in Savannah, and we were married 2 weeks later on December 14th of 2011. And so I learned that our wedding anniversary, December 14th, was going to be named Greg Alia Day in Richland County in the city of Forest Acres where we live. And I wanted to use that as an opportunity to show appreciation and say thank you to police. So I had an idea. What if people could go to local restaurants, add $1 or $2 to their tab, and at the end, we would give lunches to police on December 14th to say thank you. Our first goal was just to raise enough to bring it to his agency, which would have been about 25 officers. It was a pretty small department. But we were so successful, we brought lunch to 310 officers across 14 different stations, and that next year doubled. And we kept growing up until the pandemic. Went on a little bit we had to adapt for a few years, but last year we reached almost 1,000 officers that were brought lunch. And we're looking in ways that we can expand that beyond our area in South Carolina. So we kept growing, kept doing initiatives, and we're like, this is turning into something. People are like, I think we should start a nonprofit. I'm like, okay, how do I do that? I have no idea. So sitting in the Secretary of State's office in South Carolina on March 18th of 2016, incorporating Heroes in Blue as a nonprofit, when I learned that Officer Alan Jacobs with the Greenville Police Department had been shot and killed in the line of duty, leaving behind his pregnant wife and 2 little boys. And within hours, our team, with the blessing of his agency and family, started a GoFundMe that raised $193,000 for his family. We have continued to do that tragedy response fundraiser ever since. Anytime an officer is killed or critically injured in the line of duty, and we since expanded that, we were able to provide support to the U.S. Marshal in the wake of the Charlotte shooting. We have raised, I think we're over $1.2 million that have been raised, and we give 100% of that back. We don't keep a penny. And we do that because I know firsthand the impact of losing your spouse in the line of duty and how difficult it can take for certain benefits to come in and support. And what it did for me was help me grieve in peace, and we continue to offer that. And I'm proud that we do that. But I knew early on that if we really wanted to make a difference, we had to go deeper. That while this was important, raising awareness of the positive story, showing appreciation, if we really wanted to bring about healing between police and communities, we had to dive deeper. I just wasn't sure how. That led me on a process of deep listening and learning, really seeking to understand what the causes of distrust and division were. Having conversations, sometimes really, really hard conversations, with people who had perspectives most different from my own. Alongside this journey, I was dealing with the case involving Greg's death. And I know we have DAs in the room, victims advocates, I believe. So I think you may understand what I'm saying when I say that that was one of the most painful experiences that I could imagine. Having to think about what I would want for the life of the man who took Greg from us. It was a hateful experience for me. Now, I'm going to mix it up for a second. have been asking this question in different audiences, and so I'm curious what a room full of New York public safety professionals will say. Who in the room is Harry Potter fans or Harry Potter fans? Okay, so I'll add to my poll that we have a strong but minority group in here, so we are in kindred spirits. I will also say that forget a DISC assessment. The most important personality assessment you can take is knowing your Harry Potter house. I am a proud Hufflepuff. I encourage you to find the same. I bring up Harry Potter because y'all, even if you're not Harry Potter fans, you know Lord Voldemort, he who must not be named. Do y'all know what I'm talking about? The person who killed Greg was like Lord Voldemort for me. I couldn't think about him, couldn't say his name without feeling this hate overtake my heart. And I really struggled. There was one particular day we left meeting with the solicitor, that's like our DA in South Carolina, our lead prosecutor, and I just was at a loss. You know, up until that point, I had really leaned on what would Greg want, what would Greg say, and in that instance, I didn't have an answer. At the time, I was doing work in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control. So I had a trip, so about 3.5 hours from Columbia. And I racked my brain. I was like, what am I going to do? How am I going to sit there in this courtroom for potentially years of my life, facing this person that I can't even think about? And then how am I going to go home and be the mother I want to be to our son? How am I going to teach him about empathy and compassion and forgiveness when I was struggling so hard to find that myself? You know, I had done lots of research, tried to understand what the path for justice is. I asked really difficult questions, but none of that brought my heart peace. You know what did? Imagining how I would feel if I were the mother of the man who killed Greg. And immediately I pictured him just like my own little boy, so filled with hope and possibilities. And I realized that I had spent so much time refusing to think about this man that I knew nothing about his story, but I knew that there were too many factors in our world that could have led him to that tragic place on that tragic day. And so what I shared, he ended up pleading guilty and accepted a sentence of life without chance for parole. And at his sentencing, I asked, what if we had found him before that tragic day? Would we have found a man in need? And what if we could have helped him? And that's where the vision for Serve and Connect was born, recognizing that at the end of the day, what we police communities want is more the same than it is different, right? We want our communities to be safe, the people we love to be protected, and our children to thrive. Do y'all agree with that? But in order to make that vision come true, we have to work together. And that is the work of Serve and Connect. And so in 2018, at the same location where my husband breathed his last breath, we unveiled a new mission for hope called Serve and Connect. Our mission is to foster positive change through sustainable police and community partnerships. We envision a future where police and citizens are working together as one community to address those root causes that contribute to issues related to safety so that everyone can thrive. We don't believe in us versus them. We believe that together we are better, and when we work together, we create a better future for us all. It sounds nice, but man, big deal, really hard to do, right? Sounds nice to say, but how do we really bring about healing, especially when there are so many barriers, so much distrust, so much history of pain? And that was really overwhelming for me at times, and I want to share two things with you. So one, as I came across a study by Damon Santola, a sociologist, and he was looking at the process for creating culture change, because that's really what Serve and Connect is about. I know we cannot be in every community, in every city, as much as I would love to be, that it really is about creating a movement that changes the narrative from us versus them to together we are better. And what Damon Santola found in his research, when we talk about shifting norms, it really comes down to the fringes of the outer networks. You know, I think often when we think about change, we think about influencers. Like, man, if Oprah could just share my message, then we would be set. But what Damon Santola found was that's not necessarily the case. That's actually an aftermath of when there's already been momentum. And that change really happens by repetition, the same message being shared over and over and over again. And he found that there's a tipping point at about 25% of a population. And this gives me hope because when we talk about this message, if we can engage just 25% of us, 25% here in New York, 25% in South Carolina, that we can see that tipping point for change that brings about healing and unity between police and the communities they serve. The other message I want to share is that it's a lot easier than we think it is, because the real answer lies in what you were called to do in the first place, and that's help others. To give you an example of that, I'm going to talk about an example from one of our programs. So our Compassionate Acts program was inspired by what Greg said, that for every one negative story you hear, there are thousands of positive stories happening every day that go unnoticed. A few weeks after Greg was killed, a woman wrote an op-ed. She had been experiencing homelessness, and he bought a hotel room for her for the night. And I was so honored, touched. But what I've come to see is that as proud of as I am of Greg, he's far from alone, that every day police officers are coming across people in need and finding ways to help. And what we saw is that these acts of kindness are not just things to be celebrated, but opportunities, windows into a path forward. And so through our Compassionate Acts program, our police partners across South Carolina can call us 24/7 and request some more support with emergency services to really help fill the gap. And that, I see some people scanning that QR code, will be a more in-depth video of the story I'm about to share that gives an example from this program. So one of the opportunities that we've been able to help serve was with Corporal Lawrence Brewer with the Richland County Sheriff's Office. And Corporal Brewer got a call about a case of vandalism, that there was a home that was being renovated that had been vandalized. And when he showed up, he met with the homeowner, and it was about $15,000 worth of damage. Paint everywhere, just the place was torn up. And as he was speaking with the homeowners, these three little boys walked in, 10, 12, and 13. Upon talking to them further, he learned that these were the young men that did the damage. And he asked, "What are your parents going to say about this?" And he learned that each of those young boys had lost their fathers to gun violence within the last 2 to 3 years. So working with the homeowners, they made an agreement not to press charges, but to try to help these young men. Corporal Brewer went to the home to meet with their mothers. They were each from 3 different households, all with, one had 8 kids, I believe, in the household, another 6. These were big families. And upon talking to their mothers, came to learn that they were all experiencing food insecurity. So Corporal Brewer called us and said, "Kassy, is there any way that we can work together and help these families?" We reached out to our contact at Walmart, a local manager, and asked if he could help work with us, maybe give us a deal or give us the items at cost. And he said, "You send them to me and I'll help take care of it." Those carts, look how much stuff was in there, just filled to the brim. And Corporal Brewer, along with the homeowner, showed up. The mothers thought that they were going to take out the 3 boys to mentor them. And meanwhile, they showed up with these carts filled with supplies. They've continued to mentor these young men and held them accountable. I was actually there, and you'll see in the video where they brought the young men in to clean up the property. So this isn't about not holding people accountable, but it's about showing compassion and love and kindness. And while these young men's story is still to be written, I'm hopeful that the path that Corporal Brewer, with his act of kindness, along with the homeowners and that store manager, what they chose to do, can you imagine what impact that may make for those young men and what message that shares with them? It's incredible. And now I hope that this message resonates with you and that resonates with the things that you see every day. And we recognize that it is not just one officer or one community, but that this is really how we show up and make a difference every day. And we're seeing that through our Greg's Groceries program. So Greg's Groceries is one of our initiatives where we package boxes of non-perishable food named after Greg. They're enough to feed a family of 4 for a week. And these are packed by police officers alongside community members. And the boxes then go back with the police department so that when they come across someone in need, they're able to help. I know domestic violence has been a big focus for y'all, so one of my favorite stories comes out of Columbia as well. There was an officer who saw a car in the median, and so he pulled over, and the woman wouldn't even look at him, but he could tell that something was really wrong. He did see that she had groceries on her passenger side seat, and so he remembered his box of Greg's groceries in the back of his car, went to get it, brought it to her, and he said that when he showed up at that box, it was the first time that she had smiled at him in the entire interaction. Because of that box, it opened the door for a conversation where he was able to learn that she came home to a very violent situation and immediately had to leave, didn't even have time to bring the groceries out of her car. Because of that box, he was able to build the rapport and trust that was able to get her into the support that she needed to keep safe. That's just one story. I'm very proud that since launching in 2017, to date we've packed over 16,000 boxes, and that's around 1.3 million meals. And we've worked with over 80 agencies. We are all across South Carolina and just recently expanded into North Carolina and are exploring what scale looks like next. We are gearing up on October 3rd. We are going to be packing 3,000 meals. So it's our big annual celebration. We give out our awards. The Lieutenant Governor will be joining. So really proud of this movement. But most importantly, it's about sharing a message and seeing those small acts of kindness all connected and on those ripples that create a tidal wave for change. And that video down there is a really great one that focuses and tells more about Greg's Groceries. And you'll see one of my favorite officers, Kenyatta Jenkins with Orangeburg. He's just a giant teddy bear and does amazing work. But we know that police alone can't heal communities. That is so important that we work in partnership with the communities that you serve. And that's where through Compass, we are helping build local movements that create that bridge, support the empowerment engagement of community leaders, working alongside police to address the factors that lead to crime and violence in order to promote better outcomes for everyone. I know I have some research nerds in the room like me, and you guys are having a presentation tomorrow on implementation science, so I got to put on my nerd hat and draw this out. But I think it helps explain how Serve and Connect works, that we're not a direct service provider. This is the implementation systems framework, and it focuses on the fact that we have, out of all the research and millions and billions of dollars that we spend on research, actually very little of that gets used in the real world. And so the implementation science framework looks at the process that we can take to take what we know works from evidence-based practice and make it applicable in the real world. And it talks about that you have a synthesis and translation system. So this is the body of evidence of we know what works and what doesn't work. It gets translated by a support system, and that's what Serve and Connect is. That we help support our police and community partners in distilling that information in order to drive change in their local communities. We do this in a 4-step process. So in step 1, we look at trust building and mapping needs to assets. What we want to understand is who's showing up at the table, who's missing, what are the greatest challenges, what resources are available, and where is the common ground for bringing people together. In step 2, from that, we help build a local movement. So Compass really doesn't mean anything to anyone other than us, but the Decker Collective in Richland County means something to the individuals who live in that community, just as the North Columbia Youth Empowerment Initiative means something to the residents in that community. So we help build a local movement that brings together people over a common goal. From there, we help to understand what are the evidence-based practices that are going to help make the biggest impact for a given community, help implement those plans effectively and with quality, and then the goal is sustainability. My hope is that for our Compass sites, that years down the road, people don't even know that Serve and Connect had anything to do with it. To tell you a little bit more about this, I want to talk about the North Columbia Youth Empowerment Initiative. And I know our friend in the back, given the time, I think I'm going to skip the video. So I'm going to go here. There we go. Tell the story, and then so I can share that later. But to help give some context, to talk about these partnerships at work. The North Columbia Youth Empowerment Initiative was our first Compass site, and now we work with about 6. And it began, Columbia Police Department was one of our very first partners with Greg's Groceries. And through that, we started to work more closely with them and began to host events where Greg's Groceries were included. For instance, we hosted an event called Farm Day Fun Day that really targeted food insecurity in Columbia's highest crime neighborhood, bringing together different partners, food, resources, connecting people with services, as well as having police officers there to help connect with the community, play games, hand out food, build relationships. As we continued to do the events, we're like, well, this is great, but what next? Crime and shootings were on the rise, so what could we do that would take that step further? We began to talk to different stakeholders, police and community, and what we saw was that there was a common ground around youth safety. That both police and community were concerned because youth as young as sometimes 10 were being recruited into gangs, but also you had mothers that reported being afraid for their children's lives and having them sleep in bathtubs because they were worried about stray bullets. And so working together, in 2018, we launched the North Columbia Youth Empowerment Initiative. This began, among other things, with weekly meetings where we came together. And I'll tell you all, at first, those meetings were pretty sparsely attended. But over time, momentum grew and more partners were showing up at the table. I heard that they were waiting for me to give up. They were waiting to really see what we were all about, if this was genuine. But as we had that consistency, more partners came to the table. We hosted various initiatives, like for instance, we launched our first summer series in 2019, hosting events across the community in the highest crime neighborhoods. And then in December of 2019, following a pretty violent holiday season, we sat down with our stakeholders and asked what they wanted to do. And they came up with the idea of hosting the first Empowerment for Peace Walk. It was in January of 2018. I know this is different because y'all are in New York, but we can get some pretty beautiful days in South Carolina randomly in January. It was a beautiful, crisp day, warm, sun was shining. We were marching through the streets of the areas that were most impacted by gun violence. Police and community members, arm in arm. And my favorite part were the young people that were leading the way. And the next day, they were on the front page of our local newspaper, and they were so proud. But there were some in the community who didn't like the change that was being made. And we became concerned that we may be putting people at risk. So again, we brought our partners together and asked a hard question: should this work stop? And I'll never forget, there was one woman, we'll call her Amy. She was pretty reserved at first, but over time really grew as a leader in this effort. And she said with tears in her eyes that this work couldn't stop. She said that because of the work that was being done through those partnerships in the North Columbia Youth Empowerment Initiative, she felt safe enough for her kids to sleep in separate bedrooms at night because she wasn't worried about stray bullets anymore. She said because of this work, she saw a light in her kids' eyes that she had never seen before. And she said that because of this work, she had found meaning and purpose. She shared that the first day she came to one of our meetings was the day that she planned to take her own life. But because of being a part of this movement, she had found purpose for her community and for her family. I am proud to say that we have continued this work even through the pandemic, and I think that speaks to the power of partnerships, that no one can tackle gun violence alone, that it takes all of us working together. We have grown into various initiatives. I wanted to share this particular example because I know we have street outreach workers here in the room. And through a federal grant, as part of our community safety plan, we are working with a group to launch the first credible messengers focused on youth in North Columbia. We are also working with the school district to help create a case management approach that will create dialogue between the community and schools to help identify the youth that are at highest risk and provide wraparound supports. We have peace teams. These are groups of community residents who meet monthly to create different initiatives that help build empowerment and engagement. And I'm proud to say that the statistics are showing, it looks like it's getting safer. And I know there are a lot of different reasons that contribute to this. Columbia Police Department is fantastic, and Richland County Sheriff's Department, they are doing so much hard work. And there are incredible community leaders in North Columbia and great resources. But I do think that these partnerships have been a part of that positive change, and I look forward to seeing how it continues to grow. You know, I've been talking for a while up here, and I really appreciate y'all sticking with me so early in the morning. But what I hope that you take away from these stories is, first and foremost, never disregard the power of those small moments of kindness. I think we need to redefine our understanding of what strength and courage look like. It takes strength and courage to run into a dangerous situation, to put your life on the line, absolutely, and that is so important. But it also takes strength to find that compassion for someone in their greatest time of need, to practice the patience to listen to them, to see that we are all human beings worthy of dignity and compassion and respect, and the power that that has on creating healings, one ripple of change at a time. I also hope you walk away with the power of leaning into courageous collaboration. It is really hard to work together. It's hard to come together, period. I mean, we're all so busy. We have so many things on our plate, so many competing demands. And on top of that, you talk about real violence, fear, present and past realities that are really hard. It is so critical that we lean into each other, even and especially those who are most different from ourselves, because we are all like pieces of a puzzle. We all carry different perspectives, gifts, and talents that when we come together, that we can really create a tremendous impact. And finally, consistency is key. Don't give up. This work is hard work, and it is heart work. And you're going to hit bumps along the road. Sometimes it will feel like you took 2 steps forward and 10 steps back. But the important thing is to never give up, because you don't know what lives are changing when you consistently show up to the table. All right, these are all big things. So I'm going to try one more thing here. And you can thank my friend Chris Singleton. I don't know if any of you all have ever heard of Chris, but he's incredible. His mom was tragically taken in the Emmanuel 9 church shooting in Charleston. And he has been on a mission to share a message of unity and love across our country. And I saw him do this at a training with officers in South Carolina, and I think it really drives this final point home. And so if y'all can stand, if you don't mind. So here's what I want you to take home with you. For everything I've said, and everything else you're going to hear today, if it goes in one ear and out another, and you're like really in a crunch moment, and you're struggling, and you're wondering, is this worth it? Can I keep going? How do I make a difference? I'm going to tell you that the answer is a lot closer than you think it is. And what I want you to do, you guys got some brave people in the room. We'll see how brave you are to turn and hug someone next to you. That was a good hug. That was a good one. I love it. I love it. There's the group hug action. This was awesome. So y'all, the bottom line here today is that to create healing across our communities, to spread a message of unity and hope, the answer is right in front of us. It's really about love. And I know I'm speaking to a room of big, tough public safety professionals and police officers, but that's what it's about, right? Why Greg chose to go into service and was willing to lay down his life. It's about love. The reason you do what you do every day is you love people, even if you don't know them, right? And if you keep that at the forefront of your mind and you let love lead the way, I am very confident that we can create a movement for healing and hope and a new future for safety in our communities and protection for the people that we love. Together we are better. Together there is hope. Thank you so much for your time. Please reach out, and I hope that you all have a great day, and thank you for everything that you do.
Thank you, Kassy. Really remarkable. And the work that you've done is really inspiring, and I hope has inspired all of you. So the next item on the agenda for today is breakout sessions will begin at 9:30. So please take some time, grab coffee, juice, water, some breakfast items, and be in the rooms 1 through 7, starting at 9:30. Thank you again, Kassy.